Hello everyone again. It's Mike Nielsen with Rods Wiegart. I think you guys understand the situation you guys are in. We've been contacted. There was a little confusion. You guys were trying to buy a little more time. You guys wanted us to get into a little more detail about the situation with National Indemnity, Berkshire Hathaway, Deloitte and Touche. So we've decided to extend it just a little bit to give you guys a little better understanding and further in-depth conversation that Rod's going to do here in a little bit. We've extended it to May 3rd, which is Friday at noon, before we go public, and then do what we have to do after that. One important thing I do want to bring up, this situation did occur back in the 70s with the O'Keefe elevator in Omaha, Nebraska, which they own shares of National Indemnity, and Warren Buffett tried to kick him out because they wanted him out of National Indemnity, which is a wholly owned subsidiary of Berkshire Hathaway. But it took the O'Keefe brothers to take Berkshire Hathaway and Warren Buffett to court. That's all public record and all that stuff. But my grandfather did tell me to go talk to them, which I did. I sat down to them personally about 3 years ago. And they gave me some more insight on how they handled that. But they were rewarded successfully. Instead of having one share of National Indemnity, they ended up doubling and tripling their shares because it was illegal what Mr. Buffett and Berkshire did to them. And now they do own Berkshire Hathaway. And he told me to keep those shares and never let them go. That was his suggestion with some other things. But they had to get to court for it to do that. And then it was settled immediately by Mr. Buffett. But anyway, that's one instance that we've kind of learned how you guys operate and what we're going to have to do. But with that being said, May 3rd at noon, now I'm going to give it over to Rod so you guys can give you a little more definition and a little more insight of what's going on.
I'm going to just basically hit the major points of the timing of all this thing, and so that everybody has an understanding about how we know about the shares and how we came across them in regards to the number of shares and how they were arrived at. Don was able to acquire the shares, at least Berkshire Hathaway shares at the time of the liquidation back in 1970. He got 50,000 shares upon liquidation of the partnerships. He was one of the 92 partners. Now, I've come across some other partners that were of the 92 partners at that time who knew who Don Nielsen was and knew that Don acquired shares. He didn't know, of course, nobody really knows how many, but at that point, Don told me that he had gotten 50,000 shares. And then in 1973, he acquired another 100,000, which we've talked about, and then another 50,000 in 1974. And then after that, he acquired them about 1,000 shares at a time, which comes up to the 227,000 shares. And we feel we're pretty accurate in regards to the number of shares and what we're talking about. And then what we have to discuss then goes right into how was this all maintained. Well, it was maintained basically in street name under National Indemnity. And that's why it was so important that they were able to acquire these shares later on, because Don has a major shareholder. Of course, the real key is that in auditing Berkshire Hathaway every year, Deloitte Touche or whoever accounting firm that was handling, because it was Pete Marwick up to 1986, they were able to, they would have to check this out to make sure that he still maintained his number of shares. And that at the end of each year that he had the voting power, because of the fact that he'd be voting the shares, and he never gave up his proxy. He'd sign it over to Mr. Buffett, but he always maintained control that way and always knew about his shares. The kicker was in 1996, Berkshire Hathaway changed its name. Now, I mean just changed its name to OBH Inc. They then turned around and went dormant with this corporation in 1989, and 1 minute later they set up a new corporation called NBH Inc. And they just simply transferred the cash over to the new corporation. All the assets prior to that date were maintained in OBH Inc. Now that's a dormant corporation, and a new corporation called NBH Inc. is the operating corporation or active corporation, and they've essentially got two corporations under one ID number. And then in 2002, they turned around and changed the name of NBH Inc. to Berkshire Hathaway. As you can see, that all that is just an accounting deal of having two corporations under one ID number. Now, the purpose of that was that at that point, back at that time, we were looking into the fact of Don's shares, and we were able to contact Equiserve and was able to get to the point where the lady said on the other side of the line that Don had a whole bunch of shares of Berkshire Hathaway. So we knew he had them, and they understood that we were getting real close to getting this finalized in regards to the Berkshire Hathaway. So at that point, they had to get a hold of the corporate book. So they turned around and basically went dormant with, and told Equiserve that they were going to have a merger. And what they did was they went dormant with OBH Inc. 1 minute later, out in Delaware, they went active with NBH Inc. And then at that point, they had like I said, the two corporations were under one ID number. And at that point, they turned around and got a hold of the corporate book, and then they switched the transfer agent. Now, the reason why that was important to switch the transfer agent, because they went to Wells Fargo of Texas, which is a one that Mr. Buffett could control. And at that point, they never gave the corporate book to Wells Fargo of Texas. And the reason why that's so important, and they only have a computer run, is because then they can manipulate the shareholders, the names on the shareholders, on the stock. And that's the whole purpose of the transfer agent. Way back when they set up transfer agents, the whole purpose of the transfer agent was to turn around and maintain so that the shareholders are protected from the officers and directors from the corporation, so that they do not manipulate the shares by being able to grab extra shares that are there, or to manipulate them. They had to be run through a transfer agent. Well, in this case, they had to get a hold of that corporate book to do that, and this corporate book is the one that was never delivered or has not been used as an auditing tool. And when you audit, and I know that for a fact because of my training back with Pete Marwick back in the 70s, that you had to turn around and audit the shareholders, especially major shareholders of a company, to make sure that they are still maintain their shares at the end of any particular year, to give a clean bill of or an opinion that is well met by the company. But anyway, the point being is, and it's real simple, they got a hold of the corporate book, and that corporate book, if somebody's 120 years old, like sometimes maybe a little old lady has reached 120 and she still has these shares somewhere, or they lost them, of course, now they can turn around and switch whoever name they want to on these Berkshire Hathaway shares. And that's a major problem for auditing in regards to Berkshire Hathaway because of that corporate book. Now that was how they turned around, and at that point they switched the name so that when anybody contacted in on Don's name for Berkshire Hathaway shares, there was no Don Nielsen. However, you can't do that. That's just it's not legal. And so therefore, that's how they were able to maintain these shares such quietly. That's even now where the shares are at. And everybody says, well, where are the shares? Well, it's real simple. The shares have been transferred through Don's, by Don's trust, supposedly trust, to Mr. Gates. They got Don's name on the front, and they have Mr. Gates is endorsed over to Mr. Gates, and he's just holding them. One of the reasons why he's holding them is up until May 10th, and that's a very important date if you guys don't understand, the IRS cannot assess a tax on Don Neal's estate after May 10th. That's how you avoid estate taxes, which is what this whole purpose is all about. Avoid state taxes. You turn around and transfer it to individuals that you want to control it, or in this case, control Berkshire Hathaway, or to give to your kids without, and there's two other situations like that in West Point, Nebraska. One had to do with Pliny Moody, who was the lawyer back with Don way back, where he put together the tax evasion problem with the Berkshire Hathaway in 73 and 74. And the other one is Hugo Paus, where the Hugo Paus estate never showed the Berkshire Hathaway, and the trust that they're in was transferred over to Steve, who's the one that's running the trust. Well, guess what? Steve's brother Roger and his sister never got a hold of any of the shares. So the important part about this is that this is a major problem with the shares of Berkshire Hathaway, that this has to be addressed. And the reason why nobody wants to address this problem is because of the estate tax. Once you turn around and sit down and take a large group of shares, even 100 shares, and put that on your estate and pay estate taxes and inheritance tax, you have a major problem. In this particular case, back at the time that the shares were transferred from Don by Mr. Mock over to Mr. Gates, there was about $13 billion in estate taxes that were not paid. Now that's the major problem in itself. There's about $256 million that wasn't paid in inheritance tax to Cumming County. Now that's just approximate numbers. Once we get to the bottom of this thing, we'll have a real clear case of just exactly what we're talking about. But the point being is that we have to turn around and address this and keep pushing this until we get it. And we realize that because of that deal with O'Keefe Brothers, where they turned around and forced them into a courtroom, that's what your guys' whole plan is. Your whole plan is to turn around and make us come to a courtroom. We've got our plan down on what we're going to do about going public and then going into a courtroom. We're trying to give you a chance to sit down and settle this thing with us at a meeting prior to that March, or that May, I always say March, but that May 3rd, and then turn around and discuss it, get it settled, and then we can see what happens. Now, when we settle, we already know that we're going to be awful tough with this. We know that the shares belong to Mrs. Nielsen at the time that she turned around and passed away, because of the fact of, and I'm going to go back to that, they got a divorce. Don and Barb were living in the same house together. Don had the shares in the safe in the basement. The boys turned around, and at the time that the divorce happened on that date, the boys were pissed because their mother only got the house plus the contents of the house plus $600,000. They threw Don's clothes out in the street. By the time he got home from the courtroom and got to his house, his clothes were out in the street. He was kicked out of the house officially. The shares were in the house. There was a break-in, and the break-in was handled. We know who the person was that broke in. he's come forth now. We're going to turn around and go public with everything so that they understand. And at that point, he got the combination from Don, and then at that point, he went and got Berkshire Hathaway out of the safe and delivered them over to Don. Don then used Mr. Buffett to turn around and transfer those shares that were under both names to Don's name only. He needed a affidavit from the banker, which was Dave Steffensmeyer, that says Don is the surviving spouse and that Don has possession of the shares and that both names are on it, and here's a death certificate of Barb, who died. The problem with that is that, like I said, they were under both names. The shares were, he was not the surviving spouse, he was the ex-spouse, because this took place 6 months and 16 days after the divorce. So those shares all belong to Mrs. Nielsen. And in her will, all her assets belong to the boys. That's a very simple explanation of what's going on here. The shares belong to the boys. Now, I'm going to run into something that you might not have thought about. And this is something that you might want to really consider. Since this is a fraud case all over, I mean, you look at it from the time that partnerships were liquidated. Don got the shares. He turned around and got more shares. He turned around and then they pulled the deal in with OBH Inc. and NBH Inc. All this is materially showing that there's fraud taking place. The interesting part about that is if it falls under RICO statutes, which I'm pretty sure if you look up RICO, you'll understand that now the boys are entitled to triple damages. Now, if you take a value of the stock at the time that they were transferred over to Mr. Gates, we'd have approximately 26 billion. You multiply by 3, that's 78 billion. It's really interesting on that. Now let's do a little subtracting. We already showed how Don's shares really belong to the boys. So therefore, since they belong to the boys already, we don't have no subtraction there. You just got to give it to them. As for Mr. Buffett's shares, because he's involved in this thing, we all of a sudden own all of Mr. Buffett's shares. Now, let's think about what Mr. Gates has, because he's also involved in this matter. Well, at that point, we take and use all his Berkshire Hathaway, which is primary B shares, and guess what? The boys have a major ownership of Berkshire Hathaway, along with Mr. Gates's pretty good chunk of his Microsoft. We understand very completely, going to trial, we're not going to get something like that handed over to us. You guys ain't even going to think about that. The point being is you might want to think about what we're going to suggest and have the meeting so we can turn around and tell you what we really want. And then maybe this case will get solved. As for the problem with your problem with the SEC and the deal with Touche Ross and all those guys, that's your problems. That ain't our problems. We have done nothing other than to uncover all kinds of stuff out there that's not right. And we're just a bunch of country boys. All we're trying to do is get what the boys are entitled to, and plus some damages. And it may be major damages, but the damages are going to be part of it. And then at that point, we can turn. What we're going to do is basically walk away, because we don't like trouble. We're from Nebraska. We don't really like courtrooms, and we don't trust lawyers. We've figured out a lot of lawyers, at least up in Cumming County and Madison County and a few other places, and judges, they get paid off. Your chances of getting a successful deal if you don't have a lot of money behind you and walk into a courtroom it might be an awful problem. But we're going to sit down and try to get this solved and walk out of there and get this thing over with, because we don't want to go to a courtroom. We've already demonstrated in regards to how, with the elevator, O'Keefe brothers, how they handled it. That's more of our style. They got it handled, but they had to go to a courtroom to get it. We're not interested in really going to the court, but we will. We have no problem. Matter of fact, I've suggested to the boys, and you're going to love this little suggestion. Now that you understand that we have this on a website, for us to really look for a real high, powerful lawyer, I told the boys, maybe we ought to sit down and write up a nice little classified ad in the Wall Street Journal that simply says, we need a high-priced lawyer who wants to sue Buffett, Mr. Buffett, Mr. Gates, and Berkshire Hathaway over 227,000 shares of Berkshire Hathaway. No problem with paying you. Once you see what our deal is, check our website and put this in the Wall Street Journal, in the classified ads. I'm pretty sure that will be the most frequently hit classified ad, that everybody's going to want to look at this to find out what we have and what we are talking about. And they're going to call this up, and finally, you're going to have plenty of people to talk to. But we're not interested in that. We are not interested in that at all. We simply want to turn around. We should have been able to just turn around and come forward with you guys, sit down with you, talk this thing over, got the shares that belong to Mrs. Nielsen, which is what she's entitled to. Turn around, and you've already know all about this other stuff that's been going on because you guys been engineering this. Turn around and pass the shares over to the boys where they belong, pay some damages, and we turn around and we go along our business. But there will be one other thing that the boys are going to want, and I'm going to tell you, they're going to want a seat on the board of directors. I just thought I'd let you know that at the start, because I've already asked them to be on there for the first 3 years. So now I'm going to let you back down to Mike so that he can turn around and finish this off.
I'm going to go back to the, Rod said 1989, it was 1999. With the merger, illegal merger of OBH Inc. You guys had a directors meeting out in Delaware. Within that 1 minute, you guys did that illegal merger. You guys were supposed to have a shareholders meeting, but it was 1999. I wanted to bring that first and foremost, okay? Anyway, this will be the last time. I hope you guys understand that. This will be the last time. We've given you, we've been patient. We've given you guys several times. We're giving you another opportunity for those that have asked. And I hope Mr. Buffett understands we've had a lot of help from people that within Berkshire Hathaway that are only an arm's length away. We understand the problem you have. We've heard it, what you've said, and you're right. You do have a big problem. You don't know how to handle it. And I would like to say thank you for the guys that have helped. Bringing it back to the O'Keefe brothers, I did sit down with them. They were very generous in how to handle this too. They didn't know Don Nielsen, which is very ironic if he doesn't own any shares. But anyway, May 3rd at noon. You guys have a deadline. There will be no more extensions, and I hope you guys understand that. And thank you for your time.